They brought him in without a name, 40 bullets in his body. No ID, no time, and no surgeon. But one nurse, 22, unranked, unprepared, stepped forward. That night, she didn't just break the rules. She rewrote them. A young nurse was dragged out of the hospital, just 24 hours after removing 40 bullets from a Navy SEAL. That Tuesday evening was oddly still. Helicopters hovered outside her home. The kind of calm that nurses instinctively mistrust. Too quiet. Too smooth. Like the silence before a storm. Monitors beeped steadily. Hallway lights buzzed overhead. The faint scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. At just 22, Lana Cross was young to be in the trauma unit. But her hands had already learned the rhythm of chaos. What she wasn't prepared for was what would come rolling through the doors 40 minutes later. An event that would change her life forever. The call came over the emergency line. Code red, unidentified male, critical trauma, ETA, 4 minutes. Lana snapped out of her usual rhythm and into readiness. Adrenaline quickened her pace. The trauma bay lit up like a war room. ER prep tables readied, nurses rolled in carts of sterile tools. Everyone prepared for the worst. But nothing could have readied them for what arrived. A blacked-out government SUV screeched into the ambulance bay. 2 military officers jumped out, not paramedics. No gurney, no stretcher. Just a heavy figure between them, half limp and soaked in blood. They burst through the doors with urgent authority. "We need a surgeon, now," one barked. Lana stepped forward instinctively. "What happened?" she asked, already assessing the man. Late 30s, built like a pank, blood oozing from multiple wounds. His body looked shredded, not grazed or bruised, but torn apart. His pulse fluttered beneath her fingers, faint, weak. "Gunfire," the soldier growled. "Ambush. He took over 40 rounds. He's our asset. He lives, or you answer to Washington." There was no time to explain, no time to argue. The on-call surgeon was stuck across town in a 5-car pileup. Panic sparked in the eyes of the attending nurse beside her. Lana looked around. Everyone froze, waiting for orders. No one moved, no one spoke. Except her. She said suddenly, her voice sharper than she expected. "Prep for field surgery. Get me suction, clamps, and irrigation. I'm going in." "Lana," the charge nurse began, wide-eyed. "You're not cleared." "I don't care," Lana snapped. "If we wait, he dies." There was a beat of hesitation. Then, as if snapped from a trance, the room moved. Carts rolled, gloves snapped, lights beamed down. The soldier was placed on the table, his eyes fluttering, barely conscious. She cut away his gear, layers of Kevlar and tactical fabric soaked in blood. The wounds were everywhere. Chest, side, legs, shoulder, even a grazing shot near the neck. Entry points, exit points. Some bullets were buried deep. Some had ricocheted within. 40 bullets. 40. She didn't tremble. Her hands were trained, her instincts sharp. It wasn't textbook. It wasn't protocol. It was everything she had. With trembling but determined fingers, she found the first slug, deep in the deltoid. She irrigated the wound and extracted it with precision, clamped the artery, packed the site, moved to the next. Sweat slid down her temple. Suction, irrigation, extraction, clamp. Repeat. The room was dead quiet, except for the beeping monitors and the sound of metal instruments clicking in her hands. He coded once. She shocked him. Twice. He came back. 3 bullets out. Then 5. Then 12. The surgical team, once doubting her, now followed her rhythm. They moved as one, a temporary battlefield in sterile whites. 20 bullets in. The commander watched from the corner, jaw tight, eyes locked on the nurse in blue scrubs who had no rank, no title, just courage. The man on the table, his man, was slipping away, and this young woman was pulling him back with nothing but will. 26, 31. Vitals stabilizing, a tech called out. BP's climbing. Good, Lana murmured, her voice calm but strained. We're not done. 35 bullets now sat in a bloody metal tray beside her. No one blinked, no one moved. The final 5 were buried in the abdomen, the riskiest zone. Any mistake could rupture vital organs. She took a deep breath and went in. Her fingers were soaked, her body ached, but her mind was locked in. 40 minutes had passed. 40 bullets removed. The tray was full. The soldier's chest rose and fell steadily now, a miracle in motion. Lana finally leaned back, her gloves soaked and shaking. Her team erupted in soft murmurs of disbelief. One of the nurses wept openly. The commander stepped forward, eyes wide with stunned reverence. You saved him, he said, voice low. Lana looked at the man on the table, still unconscious but alive. She nodded once. I just did my job, she whispered. But even she knew this wasn't just a job. This was the moment that made her. And, though she didn't know it yet, the moment that would also break her. Because in saving a life without permission, she had crossed an invisible line. She had acted on instinct when bureaucracy demanded silence. And while the room around her pulsed with awe and gratitude, deep within the hospital walls, gears were already turning. She walked out of the trauma bay, exhausted, coated in adrenaline and blood. The hallway lights flickered above her like tired stars. Staff she barely knew stared as she passed, some in awe, others in confusion. No one said a word. She sat in the locker room pulling off her gloves, one finger at a time. Her hands throbbed, her body shook, but in her chest, pride. For once she knew she had done something that mattered. What she didn't know was that her badge had already been flagged, that boardroom meetings were happening behind closed doors, that someone, somewhere, had already typed up her termination. Because Lana Cross didn't wait. She didn't ask permission. She saved a life. And for that, the system would come for her. The morning light had never felt softer as Lana climbed the steps of St. Alaram Medical Center, the hospital she'd worked at for 3 years. She felt the weight of the night before lingering in her body like a quiet storm. Her hands were sore, her eyes dry, but her heart, it carried something powerful, the kind of pride that only comes after pulling someone back from the brink. She had saved a man's life. No, not just any man. A soldier. A Navy SEAL. 40 bullets, 1 trauma bay, and a hospital without a surgeon. She had stepped up when no one else could, and she had won. Lana had gone home for barely 4 hours. She hadn't even changed out of her scrubs. The bloodstains had dried, proof of the fight she had faced and the miracle she had helped make real. She expected, perhaps foolishly, that someone would say thank you. Maybe not with balloons or applause, but at least with a nod, a word, a look of respect. But as she stepped into the ER hallway, something felt wrong. The usual morning chatter was gone. Nurses averted their eyes. Techs grew silent as she passed. A few glanced at her scrubs, at the red marks, then quickly looked away. She furrowed her brow, confused, but kept walking toward the break room. Then she heard it. Nurse Lana Cross, please report to administration immediately. The voice over the PA system was cold, flat, not the usual clerk's cheerful tone. Still, she obeyed. As she walked the sterile corridor, passing bulletin boards and posters promoting excellence in care, Her steps slowed. A chill worked up her spine. Something was off. Very off. She reached the glass doors of administration and pushed them open. Waiting inside were two uniformed security guards, a woman from HR she'd only seen once, and Dr. Beckman, the chief of staff, arms folded across his chest, wearing a look that could cut steel. "Lana," he said, not unkindly, "please have a seat." She hesitated. "What's going on?" The HR woman cleared her throat. "We'll get straight to it. We conducted a review of last night's events and have identified multiple violations of hospital protocol." Lana blinked. "Violations?" "Unauthorized surgical procedure. Operating without attending oversight. Breach of liability containment," the woman rattled off. She looked to Beckman, then back to Lana. "Given the circumstances, we have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The words punched the air out of her lungs. "Terminate?" Lana asked, stunned. "I saved a man's life." Beckman spoke now. His voice a touch softer, almost rehearsed. "You did what you believed was right, but that placed the hospital in a precarious legal position. We're a civilian facility. We don't answer to the military." There were no signed consents, no waivers, no clearance. Lana stared at them. "You want to talk about paperwork?" Lana's voice cracked. "He was dying. I was the only one who could help." "And you did," Beckman admitted. "But that doesn't change the risk you created." Risk. Not life, not bravery, not ethics. Risk. Lana's lips parted to speak, but no words came. Her mind reeled. Just 12 hours ago, her hands had been inside a man's chest, her focus sharper than ever, her heart steady. Now she was being told that courage, real, raw courage, was a fireable offense. The HR representative slid an envelope across the table. "Your severance, 1 week's pay, please return your badge and any hospital property." A security guard stepped forward, rehearsed, cold. As if this were standard, as if she were dangerous. Lana stood slowly. Her hand shook as she unclipped her badge, the one she'd earned with sleepless nights, impossible shifts, and lives saved. She placed it on the table like a funeral offering. She turned to go, but Beckman added one more line, hollow and useless. "You're a talented nurse, Lana. This isn't personal." She turned her head slightly. "It's not personal?" she repeated. "Then why does it feel like betrayal?" No one answered. The guards walked her through the halls, past nurses she'd trained with, doctors she'd assisted, patients who had once smiled when she entered the room. Now they stared, some with confusion, some with judgment, and some with heartbreak. By the time she reached the staff entrance, her cheeks were burning with humiliation. The metal door buzzed. She stepped out into the harsh morning sun, alone. She stood by her car for a moment, motionless. Her hands clutched the same bloodied scrubs she had worn through the night. Her knees felt weak. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had saved a life, and they had cast her out for it. She sat in the driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel. Around her, the hospital loomed, a building she had once seen as a second home. Now it looked like a fortress of silence. Her phone buzzed. A text from a fellow nurse. "I'm so sorry. We know what you did. We're proud of you." Another buzz. "You don't deserve this. They're just scared. That's all it is. Fear." But fear didn't help her now. Fear hadn't walked into that trauma bay. Courage had, and courage was now jobless. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she stared out across the parking lot. Her reflection in the windshield stared back at her, a version of herself caught between two worlds. Blood, sweat, 40 bullets. She had done what no one else could, and that had been enough to end her career. At least, that's what she thought. For now. Because somewhere above her, at that very moment, military eyes were watching, reviewing, tracking. And while the hospital turned its back, others were preparing to step forward. But for now, all she had was silence and the quiet pain of being punished for doing the right thing. The silence in her apartment was the loudest thing Lana Cross had ever heard. She closed the door gently behind her, as if even sound had become a burden. The hallway outside fell into darkness, and with it, the world she knew, the world where she was a nurse, a hero, a professional, shut itself away. Inside, everything was still familiar, too familiar. The cheap wooden counter, the half-full coffee cup, the pale blue walls that once gave her comfort now felt cold, lifeless. She dropped her keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. The sharp clink echoed longer than it should have. Lana's steps to the kitchen felt mechanical. Her scrubs still bore streaks of dried blood, some hers, some his. She should have changed, but what did it matter now? She set her bag down and saw it. Her hospital badge. There it lay, on the counter where she tossed it hours ago. The photo of her smiling face stared up from behind the plastic. L cross R N. The laminated lettering hadn't changed, but everything else had. She stared at it for a long time. That badge had once opened doors, summoned respect, brought meaning to her day. Now it felt like an insult, a relic, a label that no longer belonged to her. She sat at the kitchen table, still wearing her bloodied scrubs. Her hands rested in her lap, limp. Her body felt disconnected, like it belonged to someone else. She could still feel the phantom pressure of clamps and forceps in her fingers, the weight of 40 bullets carefully lifted from torn flesh, the beat of a failing heart beneath her palm. She had saved that man's life, and now she was alone. She looked toward her phone on the table. Nothing. No missed calls, no texts, no emails, not even a "how are you" from a nurse. She had worked with them side by side for 3 years. The silence wasn't accidental. It was chosen. Everyone knew. She was sure of it now. The story had spread like wildfire across the hospital floor, and yet no one reached out. No one stood up. Because standing beside her meant standing against something bigger, something that could swallow careers like hers without blinking. The silence wasn't empty. It was betrayal. She walked to the bathroom and stared into the mirror. The woman looking back at her looked haunted, not by guilt, but by doubt. The kind of doubt that creeps into the soul when everything you believed in turns its back on you. She slid to the floor, her back against the cool tile of the tub, her legs drawn up to her chest. What if they were right? What if she had overstepped? What if it had been reckless? She had acted on instinct because no one else would. But the system didn't care about heartbeats or instincts. It cared about liability, signatures, clearances. She had none of those. Just hands, blood, and faith. Faith in the oath she had taken. Do no harm, protect life, act when others can't. But what good was an oath if it left you unemployed? Blacklisted. Alone. Lana's stomach clenched with hunger, but the thought of food turned her cold. She hadn't eaten since the night before. Her body was collapsing inward, starving for comfort, aching for reassurance. But there was no one here to give it.
The next morning came like a whisper. Gray light filtered through the curtains. Her phone sat untouched. No messages, no apologies, no thank yous. Even the man she'd saved, whoever he was, hadn't reached out. Maybe he didn't know what she'd done. Maybe the military had whisked him away in secrecy. Maybe she was never meant to know. But her memory knew. She remembered his blood-soaked gear, the weight of him on the gurney, the way his pulse fluttered against her glove, the moment he came back to life. That moment should have meant something. It should have changed something. Instead, it had taken everything. Lana stood and wandered to the window. Outside, the city moved on. Buses rolled down the street. People walked dogs, carried groceries, scrolled their phones. No one knew that inside this apartment, a young nurse had sacrificed her entire career for a nameless, faceless soldier. The world hadn't stopped for her. It hadn't even paused. Her eyes burned, not with tears, but with the rawness of being unseen, unheard, and unbelieved. She poured a glass of water and sat at the table again. Her badge still lay there. She picked it up, turned it over. It was strange how a piece of plastic could hold so much weight, like memory burned into plastic. She considered throwing it away, but something stopped her. Instead, she placed it gently back down, like laying a hand on the chest of a sleeping patient. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be, because beneath the shame, the silence, the doubt, there was still something steady, a quiet voice buried deep inside her bruised spirit, repeating the same simple truth. You did the right thing. It didn't matter what the administrator said, what the system believed, what the headlines would twist. She knew what she had seen, the way his vitals had spiked, the breath that returned to lungs that had nearly stopped, the way a room that once held death welcomed life again, all because she refused to wait for permission. That was her truth, and truth doesn't stay buried, not forever. It may be silent now, painfully so, but silence has a way of building pressure, of preparing the world for something louder, stronger, undeniable.
Her phone buzzed. Once. Then again. She looked down. Unknown number. She didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she stood and walked to the bathroom, turned on the shower, peeled off the scrubs that had clung to her like armor. She stepped under the hot water, letting it wash away the blood, the fear, the judgment. She wasn't broken. She was healing. She was still here. And the world wouldn't stay silent for long. The day had begun like every other since Lana Cross had been fired. Quiet, slow, heavy with stillness. It had been 4 days since the hospital discarded her like a liability. 4 days of muted phone screens, unanswered emails, and blank stares from the world she thought would stand with her. She had slept little. She barely ate. Her badge, no longer a key to purpose, sat untouched on her coffee table, like a reminder of everything she'd lost. That morning, the sky over Houston was pale and cloudless. Lana sat on her porch, wrapped in an old navy blue hoodie, legs curled beneath her, sipping a lukewarm coffee that tasted more like ritual than comfort. The neighborhood was its usual self, quiet, humming with distant lawnmowers and children's laughter. Birds chirped, wind rustled leaves. The world kept moving. Then it happened. A deep rumble rolled across the sky, like distant thunder. At first, Lana didn't think much of it. maybe a storm forming. But the sound didn't fade. It grew louder, sharper, rhythmic. It didn't roll in waves, it beat. It thudded. Blades. Helicopter blades. She stood slowly, placing her mug on the porch railing. Her pulse quickened. The sound drew closer, low and forceful, as if the air itself were trembling. Then she saw it. One helicopter, then another, military, massive, their matte black billies slicing across the blue sky. They weren't flying past, they were descending, directly above her complex. Lana's heart slammed against her ribs. She backed up, confused, frightened. A dozen thoughts surged through her head. Are they looking for someone? Is this a drill? Are we in danger? Doors flew open along the street. Neighbors stepped out, some filming, some shielding their eyes from the rotor blast.
The first helicopter hovered, then began to lower. The second flanked it, circling once before slowing to a stationary drift. Dust swirled, trees bowed, car alarms shrieked. The entire block had frozen in disbelief. Lana stood on her porch, arms lifted to block the wind that slapped her hoodie. Her hair whipped around her face. Her chest rose and fell quickly, breath caught between awe and fear. The helicopter doors opened. 4 figures disembarked. Their boots hit the pavement heavy and sure. Tactical uniforms, dark glasses, rigid postures. But it was the man in the center who held everyone's gaze. Tall, decorated, a Navy commander. Silver eagles glinted from his collar. His eyes found Lana instantly, even from a distance, and he began walking toward her. She didn't move. Not even as the neighbors whispered and gasped. Not even as a little girl pointed from across the street. The commander stopped at the base of her porch steps. He removed his sunglasses. His eyes were blue, direct, human. "Lana Cross," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. She nodded slowly. "Yes." He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform and pulled out a sealed white envelope, crisp and official. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, he stepped back a pace and saluted her. Lana blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. "You saved one of ours," he said firmly, "and we don't forget that." She couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, her hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. As her fingers touched it, the commander held her gaze. "We tracked you down, because heroes like you don't belong in the shadows." Gasps rose among the crowd. More neighbors had gathered now, drawn by the noise, the wind, the spectacle. Phones were out, cameras clicked. But in that moment, none of it mattered to Lana. The world melted away. She carefully broke the seal. Inside, a letter bearing the Navy's seal. Official, formal, grateful. Beneath it, a check. $100,000. She stared at it, stunned. I don't understand," she whispered. The commander's expression softened. "You acted without hesitation. You saved the life of a Tier 1 operator. 40 bullets, no surgeon, no backup. We debriefed him. He remembers everything. The moment your hands pulled him back from death. You didn't know his name, but you gave him a future." He paused. "And now, we want to give you something back." Another officer stepped forward. In his hands, a small, velvet-lined box. He opened it. Inside, a medal. Shining, silver. An eagle. The words engraved, "For civilian valor." It wasn't just ceremonial. This was a medal reserved for acts of extraordinary bravery by civilians in the face of overwhelming odds. Fewer than 50 had ever been awarded. Lana's lip trembled. She looked up at him. "Why me?" she asked, almost breathless. The commander gave a slight smile. "Because you did what no one else could, and you did it for the right reasons." She took the medal with both hands. It felt heavier than it looked, but not burdensome. More like an anchor, a grounding weight, something solid to cling to in a world that had tried to erase her. Tears welled in her eyes. From behind her, someone clapped, then another. Soon, the entire block erupted in applause. Cheers, whistles, words of support shouted from driveways and balconies. Lana stood frozen on her porch, the medal in one hand, the letter and check in the other, as the wind from the helicopters tousled her hair and made her hoodie flap like a flag.
She hadn't been arrested. She hadn't been reprimanded. She had been honored, acknowledged, seen. She finally let the tears fall, because for days the world had turned its back on her. She had sat in silence, wondering if doing the right thing was even worth it. Now she had her answer. Lana stepped forward and extended her hand. The commander shook it firmly. "Thank you," she said, her voice raw. He nodded once. "No, thank you." And then, just as swiftly as they had arrived, the officers returned to their aircraft. Engines roared, blades spun, the wind howled one last time, bending trees, lifting dust from the ground. The helicopters lifted into the sky and vanished. Lana remained on the porch. The crowd lingered, whispering in awe, but she felt something else entirely. Peace, validation, and the beginning of something new. There are moments in a person's life that stretch time, when a single breath carries the weight of everything that came before it, and everything that must follow. For Lana Cross, that moment began, not in a hospital ward, not in a trauma bay, but on the steps of a small city auditorium, where a podium waited beneath the hum of stage lights, and 100 cameras flickered like a storm of fireflies. 2 days had passed since the helicopters came. 2 days since the Navy had descended on her modest apartment with medals, a check, and the kind of respect she thought she'd never see again. Since then, the world had shifted under her feet. The silence was gone. Now came the noise. It started with local press. A single clip, the helicopter salute, captured by a neighbor and posted to TikTok. 2 million views in 12 hours. The story was picked up by a Houston news station. Then it hit national headlines. Fired nurse saves Navy SEAL's life, receives medal, $100,000, and nation's gratitude. Then came the calls. CNN, Fox, NPR, podcasts, morning shows. Lana's inbox flooded. She hadn't opened most of the messages, still unsure how to face the attention. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't chasing headlines. She had done what she was trained to do. And yet, here she was, on the auditorium stage, surrounded by uniformed military officials, members of the press, and a community that once knew nothing of her and now couldn't stop saying her name. Lana sat in the front row of the makeshift ceremony, her back straight, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. Her nerves hummed beneath her skin. Cameras panned across the room. A Navy public affairs officer approached the podium, flanked by an American flag on one side and the official Navy SEAL on the other. "Ladies and gentlemen,
the officer began. "Today we honor a civilian who exemplified extraordinary courage, integrity, and precision in a moment of unspeakable pressure. A nurse who saved the life of one of our own." He paused. "A Tier 1 operator, whose identity, for national security reasons, will remain classified, is alive today because Lana Cross chose to act. She operated alone, without orders, without backup, and under the threat of professional and legal consequences." He looked directly at her now. "But sometimes, doing what's right isn't about permission. It's about character. Today, the United States Navy awards Lana Cross with the Distinguished Civilian Service Medal, the highest honor we can bestow upon a civilian." The room erupted in applause. Lana stood, knees slightly unsteady, and walked toward the stage. Her dress was simple, navy blue, ironically, and modest. She hadn't worn makeup. She hadn't curled her hair. She wasn't trying to be anything other than what she was. A nurse who followed her oath to the letter, even when it cost her everything. At the center of the stage, the Navy commander, the same one who had come to her porch, placed the medal around her neck. Its weight was real. It shined, catching every light in the room. The commander leaned toward her and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "You were the only line between death and life. Don't ever forget that." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. A second officer stepped forward and handed her the microphone. For a moment, Lana simply stood there, silent. The room held its breath. She didn't have a script. She didn't have a teleprompter. She just had her truth. "I don't know what to say," she began softly, her voice shaking. "I didn't plan this. I didn't wake up thinking I'd be standing here. I was just doing my job." The room quieted further. Even the press lowered their cameras slightly. "I'm a nurse. I trained for moments like that night. Not for the attention, not for the danger, but for the chance to help, to save someone. That's what we do. That's what I did." She paused, her fingers tightening around the edge of the podium. "When life hung in the balance, I chose to act, not because I'm brave, not because I'm special, but because someone had to, and no one else would." She glanced at the medal around her neck. "And I may have lost a lot because of that choice. My job, my reputation, my peace. But if I had to do it again, I would. Every time. Because that man is alive. He's breathing. He'll see his family again. And that's worth it." A single tear slid down her cheek. "I want to thank the Navy for seeing me, for believing in what happened, for restoring my name when others tried to erase it. And I want to thank everyone who sent messages, who shared my story, who reminded me that silence doesn't have to win." She looked across the audience. Some were crying, some had stood without realizing it. Reporters typed furiously. Heads nodded. "I don't need to be famous. I don't need more medals. I just need to know I made a difference, that I mattered." She stepped back from the podium. The crowd erupted. Thunderous applause rose through the room, bouncing off every wall, echoing like a roar of justice long delayed. People stood, cheered, even the press clapped. For a full minute, Lana stood motionless, absorbing the moment like oxygen after drowning. Because just days ago, she had been dragged out of a hospital like a criminal. She had walked in shame and silence, wondering if she'd ever heal from the blow. But now she stood like a monument to courage, to resilience, to everything they tried to destroy in her. After the ceremony, reporters swarmed, politely, microphones extended. She answered a few questions, kept her tone humble, measured, gracious. She was trending again within hours. #LanaCross, #NurseHero, Hashtag 40 bullets. Her speech circulated the internet. A U.S. senator retweeted the video. Podcasts debated the hospital's decision. Legal analysts called her firing a cautionary tale. Nurses around the country rallied behind her. She did what we're all trained to do, one said, and she paid the price. But no longer in the shadows. No longer alone. Lana received an offer from a national hospital chain, a newly created position, Director of Emergency Ethics and Advocacy. She didn't accept it. Not yet. She wasn't chasing redemption, because the truth was, she never needed redemption. The world had just taken its time catching up to the truth. That night, Lana returned to her apartment. The air smelled different, cleaner. She sat down with a cup of hot tea and watched the replay of the ceremony online. When she saw herself on that stage, her voice, her tears, it didn't feel like watching someone else. It felt like witnessing who she had always been. Not a victim, not a cautionary tale, but a symbol, proof that doing the right thing can be painful, but it's never pointless. The camera froze on her image, metal gleaming, eyes steady, mouth set in quiet strength. And beneath it, the headlines finally told the truth. Lana Cross, the nurse who chose life over fear and won. The air was cool and crisp the morning Lana Cross stepped off the plane in Denver. Her breath curled visibly as she stepped onto the tarmac, 2 modest suitcases rolling behind her, and a folded letter from the Navy tucked into the inside pocket of her coat. It had been only a week since the helicopters arrived, only days since the world began calling her a hero. But here, far from flashbulbs and headlines, she came not to be praised, but to begin again. Ridge Haven Medical wasn't the biggest hospital. It didn't glimmer like the towers in Houston, but it stood proud, clean, and welcoming beneath the snowy mountains. Its glass entrance reflected the morning sun, and as Lana approached the doors, she didn't feel nerves, only purpose, the kind that roots itself deep in your chest and whispers, "You're home." Inside, the lobby buzzed with soft conversation, the gentle hum of care in motion. At the front desk, a young receptionist looked up, eyes widening. "You must be Miss Cross," she said, standing. "They've been waiting for you." Lana smiled, unsure how to respond. Every moment since the helicopters had felt surreal, like walking through someone else's story. Yet this moment, stepping into a place not to be shamed, but trusted, felt more real than anything in weeks. She was led through wide halls and clean corridors. Nurses offered polite nods. Some whispered her name. Others simply watched, eyes full of quiet gratitude. She didn't strut. She didn't need to. The air of respect followed her without effort. She hadn't demanded this position. It had found her, because her truth refused to be buried. Her new office sat at the far end of the emergency wing. Her name had already been placed on the glass in soft silver letters, Lana Cross, RN, Chief of Emergency Response. She ran her fingers over it lightly, letting the moments settle. Inside, a desk, a new coat, shelves lined with leadership books, and a welcome note from the staff. "We're proud to work with you." That first day, she didn't hide in her office. She walked the floor. She checked in on patients. She shadowed triage. She knelt beside a child with a fever, reassured a pacing father. She took notes. She listened. She belonged. By sunset, she stood outside the hospital, coat wrapped tight, breath rising into the twilight sky. Behind her, Ridge Haven buzzed with life, a place that had chosen to see her not as scandal, but as strength. She looked up at the stars breaking through dusk, smiled faintly, and whispered, "This is where I was meant to be." She hadn't just found a new job. She had stepped through a better door, one built on truth, lit by purpose, and held open by people who still believed in doing what's right. The sun cast a golden hue across the vast Navy base. Helicopters idled in the distance, their shadows stretching long across the tarmac. Months had passed since that fateful night, since Lana Cross made the impossible decision that would unravel and then rebuild her life. Now she stood quietly beside a recovery center. Inside, the room was simple. A single bed, a window overlooking the training fields. The man lying there was no longer pale and fragile. He was stronger now, healed. Those scars still ran deep across his skin. He looked up as she entered. Silence said everything. Then he smiled faintly. "They told me your name." "Lana," she nodded. "They told me yours." "Not all of it, though." They both chuckled softly. "No cameras? No microphones. Just us." They sat for a while, speaking in low tones. About the night, the panic, the pain, the 37th bullet, the moment he thought it was over, and the hands, her hands, that pulled him back. It wasn't a story for the press. It was one they shared alone. Two survivors of the same moment, each changed by it forever. As she stood to leave, he said, "I owe you more than my life." She shook her head gently. "You owe me nothing. You gave me something too. The chance to remember why I became a nurse." They shook hands. No salute, no ceremony, just mutual, silent respect. Outside, the breeze had picked up, fluttering the flags overhead. Lana walked slowly toward the exit gates, the afternoon light washing over the base. Her steps were calm, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Then came a hesitant voice behind her. "Miss Cross?" She turned to find a young woman, barely 20, in crisp nursing whites, her badge still fresh with lamination. She stood stiffly, clutching a notepad to her chest, eyes wide with awe. "I just wanted to say, you're the reason I went into nursing," she said quickly. "I read everything, watched the interviews. You made me believe we could still make a difference." Lana smiled softly. She stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. "Promise me something," she said quietly. "Never wait for permission to do what's right." The girl nodded, eyes misty, holding the promise like a sacred oath. Behind them, the hum of blades returned. 2 helicopters lifted gracefully into the sky. But this time, they weren't there in search or panic. They hovered in salute, rising above the base like guardians of a quiet truth. Lana looked up once, then turned toward the road ahead. She didn't walk like someone who had lost everything. She walked like someone who had found her place in the world not because of what she endured, but because of what she dared to do when it mattered most.